I will be delivering the keynote speech this year, just like I did last year. You asked for an encore, so you're getting one. I was hoping to share with you a summary of the hundreds of opportunities that we have covered on our website and magazine since our last conference. There are plenty in all sectors, including hospitality, retail, real estate, manufacturing, technology, finance, education, health, and other sectors. Tens of thousands of jobs have been created by billions of dollars in new investments and expanding businesses. Most of you have been reading what we have been writing, and still, the mood is somber, morale amongst business people is low, and the outlook for the future is dismal. I'm here to tell you that you should not be. So my presentation today is titled Myths and Realities, because there are many myths and many realities missed. I'll try to shed some light. Last year, we have presented an expose making the case that our economy, while it suffers from many structural ailments, is still standing on solid grounds. However, in the press and social media, there are full of commentaries and articles that are promising economic gloom and monetary doom. Otherwise responsible public and private sector officials are running a race of who can portray a darker picture of our economic situation, comparing Lebanon to Greece and even Venezuela. Let me assure you and show you, we are nowhere near either of these two countries. These articles and statements, especially when coming from otherwise sane and respectable people, are irresponsible, even downright crazy. This is leading me to make the case once again with another set of figures than last year. The findings I will present today are in contradiction of common beliefs, but facts are facts. Myths, half-truths, fabrications have taken over reality. They have been repeating so many times that they are now ingrained in the minds of most citizens who don't know any better. But also policymakers and economists who should know better are repeating these myths and half-truths. So I'm going to cover 7 out of dozens of popular fallacies, and we'll try to separate fact from fiction. And these myths are that the economy is crumbling, that the government is going bankrupt, that the lira is about to collapse, that business environment is getting worse, that electricity is getting worse and internet speed is unbearable, that social indicators are getting worse, and that Syrian refugees are a cause for disaster. بكفي هالقد معك. Okay, I'm going to try to dispel all of these 7 points. So let's start with the first one, that the economy is crumbling. The myth of the economy is crumbling. Since we are celebrating our 20th anniversary, I will look at the economic performance of the country for the past 20 years, and then in the past few years. We see that in our 20 years of existence as Lebanon Opportunities, our GDP has grown 230%, from about $16 billion to about $52 billion, or at an average of 6% per year. Our GDP growth rate has never registered a year of recession. I don't know how many countries can claim that. In the past 3 years, our growth rate has averaged between 1.5% and 2%. And some of you may say, only 2%? Let's look at the rest of the world. Most of the countries, strong or weaker countries, have a growth rate between 0 and 3%. So we're in good company. I mean, look at Germany, for example, the UK, the US. They have growth rates similar to Lebanon. The reality is that our economy is not crumbling. It may be facing problems. We have to face these problems, but let's not keep repeating the myth that tomorrow morning we're going to wake up, look at the sky, and see written in the clouds, out of business. We're not out of business. The second myth is that the government is going bankrupt. What's bankruptcy? A simple definition of bankruptcy is when the debtor, the government in this case, has a liquidity problem and is unable to pay salaries, debt service, and other obligations. When the government is short of liquidity, it borrows. And if borrowing fails, bankruptcy occurs. Let's look at some treasury indicators. For the past 3 years, we see that revenues are somehow stable. We see that expenses are also somehow stable. And we see a debt service that is seriously increasing, which brings a total deficit of about $5 billion for last year. $5 billion, oh my God, 10% of GDP. Bankruptcy, no, not bankruptcy. We also notice that our banking system has about $75 billion of cash sitting idle, doing nothing, which means about 15 times the yearly deficit. The banks are willing to lend, and the government is willing to borrow. This may not be a good solution. This may be expensive. This may delay needed reforms. We can have any judgment except that we're on the verge of bankruptcy. Another slide here, we show that the reserves at the banks are even increasing. Last year, we had around $11 billion increase in bank deposits, which means that the ability of banks to loan the government is increasing, not decreasing. So the reality is that as bad as it is, as bad its performance as it is, and its governance as it is, and all the bad words you can say about the government is not going bankrupt. But what about debt over GDP? Debt over GDP. The most favorite ratio in the world, that means nothing. Out of context, at least. You keep reading economists and writers who build theories on one ratio taken out of context, which is debt over GDP. Let's look at the debt GDP of other countries. Japan has a debt over GDP of 250%. Is Japan going bankrupt? Most countries, at least half the countries of the world, have their debt over GDP over 100%. Ours is very high. It should go lower. But this does not mean that automatically, if your debt over GDP is high, that you're going bankrupt. So the reality is that the government is not going bankrupt. And we should be happy. The third myth is that the lira is about to collapse. The dollar in 2 weeks will be 5,000 liras. This is what I've been hearing for the past 10 years. How does the currency collapse? Let's see the mechanics of it, to see how possible for the lira is to collapse. Either the authorities, the monetary authorities, decide to force a devaluation. I can assure you this is not in their plans. Was never in their plans, and probably will never be in their plans. So the other way for the lira to collapse is to be forced by the market, which means that people will go and try to exchange their dollar for 1,500 liras and will not get it. In the system, we have the equivalent of $55 billion in lira in circulation. This is all the liras that are out there. In the banks, in your pocket, anywhere. Out of which around 15 billion, by law, you cannot convert to any other currency. This is money that is being held by the government, by Social Security, by pensions, by municipalities, a large number of public or semi-public organisms, which means that the actual convertible money is about $40 billion, which is more or less a bit more than the $34 billion in reserves, in cash reserves at the central bank, not including the gold reserves, which means that our lira is almost 100% covered, which makes it really, and by far, and no tomatoes please, it makes it the strongest currency in the world, because no other currency has this type of coverage. The bankers are laughing. The next myth is that the business environment is getting worse. Okay, it's not getting better, okay? From now I'm telling you, it's not getting better. It's getting worse here and there. But the business environment in general is not getting worse. Business morale is low, and the general feeling is that the economy is going backwards. Who here is going to tell me that the economy is not going backwards? Except for Maroon, everybody is telling me that the economy is going backwards, although we've seen the figures. It is true that the trickle-down effect is not even among sectors, but the overall figures are as follows. Let's take a look at VAT revenues. This is what the government charges in VAT. VAT is a good proxy for consumption and for business activity. And we see that in the past 3 years, VAT figures have been more or less the same. They're not getting better, but they're not getting worse. And of course, here is not included all the illegal imports and all the merchandise that enters the market without paying VAT. So if we factor these in, I don't know what the figures will look like, but more than this. Let's look at another index, the index that is published by the Chamber of Commerce and the Lebanese Franchise Association. If you look at the top line, we see that that index has improved from 2014. It is still below the base year of 2012 100, which reflects the 2011 activity. Yani, before the Syrian crisis. But after a period of regress, we see that the overall index has improved. And we see that there are some winners and some losers. Among the winners are the food and beverage, cosmetics, medical services, and hospitality. And among those who have suffered, who have gotten worse, are luxury items, clothing, and household goods. Another way to look at commercial activity is to look at foreign trade. And we see that our import figures have been more or less stable, which confirms the VAT figures. And we see that our export figures, and we have a term at Lebanon Opportunities called true exports, which are the exports that exclude jewelry, re-export of oil, and scrap. So we measure the true activity of manufacturing and agricultural export. And here we have a serious problem. A serious problem due to high cost of manufacturing, to obstacles in exporting via land after the Syrian crisis. And this is a problem that needs to be focused on and addressed. Hotel occupancy has also maintained and even slightly improved. These are for 4- and 5-star hotels. At that level, hotels are on a break-even point usually, not more. Real estate. No. 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 The real estate sector is not dead. In the past 3 years, we see that they have been 60 to 70,000 real estate sales transactions at a value of between $8 to $9 billion. If this is dead, this is the largest sector in our economy. Now, $1 million apartments in downtown, 500 square meters, okay, they're not selling. 100 square meter apartments or below in suburbia, in places that are a driving distance from Beirut or other job centers, they are selling. And our friends in commercial banks are telling us that the number of housing loans that they're giving have increased, not decreased, which confirms also these numbers. Now, granted, the sales figures are a little bit delayed because they reflect the recordation date, which may be a sale that has occurred several years before, but recorded when the apartment has been delivered. But also today's sales are not being recorded. And if we cross-check with the delivery of cement that has happened these 3 years, it confirms a little bit these numbers. New car sales has been more or less stable, despite the fact that I think we have a saturation in that market in terms of number of cars per capita. Still, it is being maintained. This is an interesting one. You know the Lebanese expatriates. Ya haram. Ya haram, they are being kicked out of their work in the Gulf. They are being chastised in Africa. They don't have money anymore to send their families here. But they keep sending. And they keep sending every year more than the year before. The problem is with the banks, ya khayi. They don't give you money to buy a house. They don't give you money to buy a car. And if you're a business and you want to get a business loan, forget it. right? مظبوط؟ بلا مظبوط. مش مظبوط؟ Okay, مش مظبوط. This is credit, total credit versus GDP over the last so many years, since 1990. And we find that credit to the public and private sector is around 200% GDP, which means that everybody has taken as much loan as they can handle. We're maxed out on loans. That's why they have so much liquidity in the banks that is sitting. So access to credit is available, and the banks are eager to lend you if you have something that can pass a credit committee. The business environment, while not getting better, is not getting worse. Hon, I have to hide. And we're getting into more difficult stuff. Electricity and internet. Nobody is happy about the state of electricity. And it is a just cause. Yes, we should be getting power 24/7. We don't. But while waiting for miracle solutions through barges, power plants, renewable energy, and other schemes, our current production is stable and not going backwards. We're producing a little bit more electricity than before. لا ما تزقف. But this is the electricity production. Okay? It may be uneven throughout the country. If you live in Beirut, you have a better experience than if you're living in Akkar. But this is what we have been producing, more or less the same. Internet speed. First, the internet penetration has increased. The speed has increased noticeably, whether in Beirut or in many other areas. E1 lines are now available and cheaper. Around 100,000, I think, or more fixed lines are now available for purchase. مظبوط دوجيرو؟ مظبوط. Telecom rates have dropped considerably and will continue to do so. We still need 3 to 4 years to catch up with the rest of the world and to have a total coverage. But this is not an indication of things going backwards. And 2 years ago, we would not have been able to say that. Electricity is not getting worse, and internet speed is improving. Okay, social indicators, I'm going to go quickly on that. Just a few indices, because there are hundreds of indices on social indicators. So I picked out the ones that are looking good. Okay, this is life expectancy at birth. We see a constant improvement. We're going to live longer. And your children are going to live longer than you. Infant mortality is dropping. So you're going to have more children. Years of schooling is more or less stable at around 13 years, which is good. And employment ratio, now before I show you the graph, let me explain to you what this ratio is. Since unemployment is not consistently measured in Lebanon, the only other figure that we have is employment. It's the ratio that measures the percentage of people working over the total population. So those not working include the unemployed, students, housewives, retirees, and other similar categories. Statistics has shown a serious unemployment level among the youth. But this chart shows that while matters have not improved, they have not regressed either. So social indicators are not getting worse, at least these ones. Okay. Now the most sensitive, myth. Syrian refugees are cause for disaster. How many Syrian refugees are there in Lebanon? Can anybody tell me? We have 2 million there. Who says more? 2.5. Okay. The UN says that the number of refugees is declining and has now went under 1 million. Government officials say that we have 1.5 million. Other politicians, especially the excited one, say that we have 2 million. And experts on TV have gone. Most people see in these refugees a danger. I see an opportunity, at least economically. And away from politics and confessional sensitivities, let's all admit that these refugees are not going back until a resolution is reached in Syria, no matter how much one of our ministers is trying hard. Okay? We cannot send them back all by ourselves. So until they go back, let's try to find a win-win situation. You have hundreds of thousands of ready people ready to work. You have a labor force that we are not using. Let's look at some of the countries from the 19th century till today that have received large number of people, much larger than normal. Well, first the Americas, then Australia, then Canada. And nowadays, look at countries like Germany, like Saudi Arabia, like Hong Kong, like Australia. They have all flourished. Nobody went bankrupt because they had many people able to work. Our industrial base is, for example, is suffering from high cost of production. Well, this may be an answer. The problem is not that we have refugees. The problem is that we don't enforce on them the same laws that apply to our citizens and to other nationalities. If Syrian refugees are granted work permits and required to obtain the necessary licenses to open businesses, tax them and have them register at the Social Security, then we will have an important growth component of GDP. This does not mean tautin. And I don't know what will happen if they get too comfortable here and things get better in Syria and they don't go back. But it looks like this bridge is going to take quite some time before we get to cross it. We need a partnership, and this partnership will enhance revenues for the Treasury and create consumers. We all need more consumers. If you don't see this, no offense, please, but you should not be in business. Thank you.